The United States Army once built a nuclear-powered city beneath Greenland's ice. It had heated barracks, laboratories, medical facilities, a chapel, a movie theater, workshops, kitchens, and nearly 2 miles of buried corridors. But Camp Century was not only a scientific station, it was also a test. Behind the public story was a secret Cold War plan called Project Iceworm, an idea to hide hundreds of nuclear missiles beneath the Greenland Ice Sheet and move them between thousands of possible launch positions. The ice was supposed to conceal the system. It was supposed to protect it, and it was supposed to remain stable for generations. Then the ice began to move. Walls bent inward, ceilings dropped, doors twisted inside their frames, corridors slowly narrowed as thousands of tons of snow and ice pressed down from above. The Americans shut down the base, removed the nuclear reactor, and abandoned the city. But they did not remove everything. Fuel, wastewater, chemicals, infrastructure, and contaminated materials remained buried beneath the ice. For decades, almost nothing could be seen from the surface. Then, in 2024, a NASA research aircraft flew over Greenland with a radar system designed to look through the ice. The scientists were not searching for Camp Century, but something unnatural appeared in the data. Long, parallel structures, collapsed trenches, a human pattern still trapped beneath more than 100 feet of ice. Researchers compared the radar image with old military plans. The geometry matched the buried layout of Camp Century. The base had not been discovered for the first time. Its location had been known for decades. But the new radar image revealed its remains with unusual clarity. The tunnels were no longer usable. The rooms were no longer intact. The entire complex had been compressed and distorted by decades of ice movement. And yet, the shape of the city remained. A lost American military settlement sealed inside Greenland. This is Camp Century, the secret city the ice was supposed to hide forever. A nuclear-powered community built beneath the Arctic. A hidden military dream defeated not by the Soviet Union, but by the slow movement of the ice itself. To understand why the United States built a base in such an impossible place, we have to return to the first years of the Cold War. After the Second World War, the United States and the Soviet Union became rivals in a global nuclear confrontation. Both sides built larger weapons, faster aircraft, long-range bombers, submarines, radar systems, and eventually, ballistic missiles capable of crossing continents. Suddenly, the Arctic was no longer a distant wilderness at the top of the world. It was the shortest route between North America and the Soviet Union. On a flat map, Greenland may look remote from everything. On a globe, it sits directly between the two superpowers. Bombers flying north could reach their targets more quickly. Radar stations in Greenland could detect approaching aircraft. Military bases there could support surveillance, communication, and Arctic operations. The United States already operated Thule Air Base, now called Patuxent Space Base, in northwestern Greenland. But some military planners wanted to go farther. They imagined turning the ice sheet itself into a weapon. Greenland belonged to the Kingdom of Denmark, and Denmark was a NATO ally. Yet Greenland was not an empty military platform. It was, and remains, the homeland of the Greenlandic people, with its own communities, history, culture, and political interests. During the Cold War, decisions about Greenland were often made far away, in Washington and Copenhagen, while the people living closest to these projects had limited influence over them. The official idea behind Camp Century sounded less threatening than a hidden missile system. The base would test whether soldiers could live and work beneath the Greenland ice sheet. Engineers would study construction methods. Scientists would examine snow, ice, and climate. The Army would test transport, water production, communications, and power generation in one of the most hostile environments on the planet. That public mission was real. Camp Century did become an important engineering and scientific experiment, but it also served another purpose. It could show whether a much larger military system might one day be built beneath the ice. The Army wanted to know whether Greenland could hold more than a small research station. Could it hold roads, railways, power plants, thousands of miles of tunnels, and hundreds of nuclear missiles hidden from the enemy? Camp Century would become the test, a small city beneath the snow, built to answer a much larger and more dangerous question. Construction began in 1959. The location was deep on the ice sheet, roughly 150 miles from the American base at Thule. There was no ordinary road, no town nearby, no forest, no exposed ground on which to pour a normal foundation. Everything had to be carried across the ice. Heavy tractors pulled long trains of sleds containing fuel, machinery, steel arches, prefabricated buildings, food, and construction equipment. The journey itself was dangerous. Crevices could open beneath the snow. Storms could erase visibility. Machines could fail far from shelter. Temperatures could turn a simple repair into a survival problem. When the construction crews reached the site, they did not drill deep underground like miners cutting through rock. Instead, they carved enormous open trenches into the compacted snow near the surface. Special machines cut long corridors. Steel arches were placed across the top. The trenches were covered with snow. Inside them, workers assembled prefabricated buildings. The result looked like a town placed inside a giant system of artificial ice caves. Camp Sentry contained around 3 kilometers, nearly 2 miles, of covered trenches. The network included living quarters, offices, laboratories, storage areas, workshops, a kitchen, dining facilities, medical rooms, communications equipment, a chapel, and a theater. At its busiest, the base could house about 200 people. The longest corridors were broad enough for vehicles and equipment. Electric lights ran through the tunnels. Ventilation systems moved air through the buried spaces. Heating protected the people, machinery, and pipes from the Arctic cold. From the surface, almost none of this could be seen. Only entrance structures, ventilation shafts, and service buildings interrupted the white landscape. Beneath them was an illuminated underground world. The Army promoted Camp Sentry as the city under the ice. Official films showed soldiers eating hot meals, receiving haircuts, working in laboratories, and walking through clean, brightly lit corridors. The message was optimistic. American engineering, it seemed, could conquer even Greenland. The ice sheet was presented as empty space, waiting to be transformed. But from the beginning, the construction crews were not building on stable ground. Every room, every tunnel, and every steel arch rested inside snow that was slowly compressing and flowing. The city looked permanent, but the material around it never stopped moving. Living at Camp Sentry meant existing inside a world without ordinary horizons. A soldier could wake up, eat, work, exercise, and sleep without seeing the sky. There were no streets in the usual sense. The central trench functioned like an underground avenue. Side corridors connected the barracks, laboratories, and service areas. The walls were made of snow. The ceilings were curved steel covered by more snow. The light came from electric lamps. Outside, the wind could move across the ice sheet for hundreds of miles. Inside, men worked under fluorescent lights and listened to the sound of generators, ventilation systems, and machinery. Camp Sentry was designed to reduce the psychological pressure of isolation. There was a theater where films could be shown. There was a chapel. There were recreational areas. Hot food was prepared in the kitchen. The medical section could handle illness and injuries without immediately evacuating a patient across the ice. The camp had showers, toilets, workshops, and communications with the outside world. Yet daily life remained difficult. The base was almost entirely male. Personnel lived closely together with little privacy. The same faces appeared at breakfast, during work, at dinner, and in the recreation rooms. Weather could delay transport. Mechanical failures could not always be solved by ordering a replacement part the next morning. Everything depended on planning. Food had to be stored. Fuel had to be protected. Heat had to be controlled. Waste had to go somewhere. Even the warmth that kept the soldiers alive created problems. Heat transferred from buildings into the surrounding snow. It changed the ice around the tunnels. Warm areas could deform faster than cold ones. The station also had to produce water. There were no underground pipes leading from a city reservoir. The base existed inside frozen water, but that water had to be melted, collected, and distributed. Engineers developed systems that melted cavities in the ice and pumped the water into the camp. The waste system was less elegant. Liquid waste was released into the surrounding ice through specially prepared areas. At the time, the ice sheet was treated as a permanent frozen container. The assumption was simple. Whatever entered the ice would remain there. That belief shaped almost every decision at Camp Sentry. The tunnels would stay buried. The waste would stay buried. The ice would preserve the city and hide the evidence of its existence. The people working there could not know that decades later, scientists would be studying whether climate change might eventually bring that waste back toward the surface. Camp Century needed large amounts of reliable energy. Diesel generators could provide electricity, but diesel had to be transported across the ice in enormous quantities. Every gallon required fuel, vehicles, labor, and favorable weather to reach the station. The Army believed nuclear power could change that. A compact reactor could provide electricity and heat for years, while requiring far less fuel to be transported. The reactor chosen for Camp Century was called PM-2A. It was designed as a portable military nuclear power plant. Portable did not mean small enough to carry by hand. It meant the reactor could be divided into components, transported to a remote location, and assembled there. The equipment was hauled across Greenland and installed inside its own trench beneath the snow. In 1960, Camp Century became one of the most extraordinary nuclear sites in the world. A working reactor operated beneath the Greenland Ice Sheet. It supplied power to the base and demonstrated that nuclear technology could function in a place with no ordinary roads, no local power grid, and almost no surrounding infrastructure. For the Army, this was a major achievement. The reactor reduced the need for diesel deliveries. It supported lighting, heating, ventilation, cooking, communications, and scientific work. It also strengthened the image of Camp Century as a self-contained city of the future. But operating a reactor inside moving ice created new complications. The reactor area generated heat. The trench surrounding it required maintenance. As the snow and ice compressed, the ceiling moved downward. Workers had to remove snow and reshape parts of the tunnel system to keep the space usable. The reactor was never left behind with its fuel inside. After roughly 3 years of service, the Army shut it down, dismantled it, and removed it from Greenland. This is an important distinction. Camp Century did not leave an operating nuclear reactor buried under the ice. But removing the reactor did not mean removing every radioactive or contaminated material connected to the base. Some liquid waste and low-level radiological material remained within the buried debris field. The reactor had proved that nuclear power could operate in the Arctic. What it could not prove was that the city around it would remain structurally stable. Camp Century was impressive, but compared with the secret plan behind it, it was tiny. Project Iceworm was one of the most ambitious military concepts of the Cold War. The United States Army proposed building a huge network beneath the Greenland Ice Sheet. The plans imagined approximately 4,000 kilometers, about 2,500 miles, of tunnels. Inside that system, up to 600 nuclear-armed missiles could be moved between thousands of possible launch locations. The missiles would not remain permanently fixed in one visible position. They could be rotated through the tunnel network. An enemy would not know exactly where each weapon was located. Even if the Soviet Union identified part of the system, it would be difficult to destroy every possible launch point. The ice would provide concealment. Greenland's location would place the missiles within range of Soviet targets. And the enormous scale of the network would make a successful first strike against it extremely difficult. On paper, the idea was terrifyingly logical. A hidden nuclear fortress under Greenland, protected by distance, protected by ice, connected by underground railways and roads, capable of surviving an attack and launching missiles in return. But the project existed mainly in plans and studies. The full missile network was never constructed. Camp Century did not contain hundreds of nuclear missiles. Its role was to test the technologies that a larger system might require. Construction in snow, long-term occupation, nuclear power, transportation, and maintenance beneath the ice. The political situation was also dangerous. Denmark publicly followed a policy opposing nuclear weapons on its territory. The full scale and purpose of the Iceworm proposal were not presented openly to the public, and the necessary approval for deploying the missile system was never secured. For decades, most people knew Camp Century as a scientific and engineering station. The secret missile plan became widely known only after historical investigations and declassified records emerged. This difference matters. The public story was not completely false. Scientists really did work there. Engineers really did test Arctic construction. The base really did contribute to research. But those activities existed beside a hidden strategic ambition. Camp Century was both an experiment and a demonstration. It asked whether America could live beneath Greenland. Project Iceworm asked whether America could fight a nuclear war from beneath it. The surface of Greenland looks solid. A person standing on the ice sheet may see nothing moving at all. But an ice sheet is not a giant block of stationary ice. Under its own weight, it flows. The movement may be slow, but it never stops. Snow accumulates at the surface. Older layers are compressed below. Ice moves outward under pressure. The material bends, deforms, and responds to heat. For Camp Century, this became the fatal problem. The engineers knew the trenches would require maintenance. They expected some compression. But the deformation occurred faster and more severely than the city's design could comfortably handle. The walls moved inward. The ceilings descended. Steel arches shifted. Doors no longer fit correctly. Pipes and cables had to be adjusted. Workers repeatedly cut away snow and ice to preserve the shape of the corridors. The reactor trench became especially difficult. Heat from the facility affected the surrounding material, while the weight and flow of the ice continued to press downward. The city was not being destroyed by a dramatic avalanche. There was no single moment when the entire base collapsed. Instead, the ice applied pressure every hour of every day. A few centimeters here, a bending wall there, a ceiling gradually moving lower. Maintenance could delay the damage, but it could not stop the ice sheet itself. This was disastrous for Project Iceworm. A small research base could survive for several years with constant repairs. A missile network stretching thousands of miles could not. Imagine maintaining thousands of launch positions while every tunnel slowly changed shape. Rails would shift, doors would jam, missile chambers would deform, power lines and ventilation systems would require endless repair. The weapons were supposed to move secretly through the network, but the network would be fighting the ice every day. The environment that was meant to protect the missiles would eventually crush the infrastructure built to hold them. By the early 1960s, the Army understood that the dream of a permanent city beneath Greenland was far more fragile than the promotional films suggested. Camp Century could prove that humans were able to construct beneath the ice. It also proved why they should not build an enormous, permanent missile fortress there. Greenland had defeated Project Iceworm without firing a weapon. The ice simply kept moving. Camp Century's permanent population began to decline. The nuclear reactor was removed, the station stopped operating as a continuously occupied base, and continued only through limited seasonal activity. In 1967, it was abandoned. The Americans did not excavate and remove the entire city. Doing so would have required reopening the tunnels, dismantling kilometers of infrastructure, and carrying huge quantities of material back across the ice. Instead, much of Camp Century was left where it stood: buildings, steel structures, railway components, pipes, electrical systems, fuel-related material, wastewater, diesel fuel, chemical pollutants including PCBs, and some low-level radioactive material associated with the reactor's operation. The logic behind this decision reflected the scientific expectations of the time. Snowfall would continue. The base would be buried deeper. The wastes would remain frozen and isolated from the environment. The ice sheet seemed permanent on any human timescale. For decades, that assumption appeared correct. Camp Century disappeared. Snow covered the surface openings. The tunnels deformed and collapsed. The camp moved deeper beneath accumulating layers. It became invisible from above. But invisible did not mean gone. A later scientific assessment estimated that the debris field contained thousands of tons of physical material and roughly 200,000 liters of diesel fuel, in addition to wastewater and other contaminants. The exact condition of everything beneath the ice is difficult to determine because the site cannot simply be opened and inspected like an abandoned building. It is now a crushed, buried field of debris within a moving ice sheet. In 2016, researchers examined what could happen under future climate scenarios. Their conclusion was not that the waste would certainly emerge tomorrow. The risk depends on how quickly the climate warms and whether the Camp Century region shifts from long-term snow accumulation to sustained ice loss. Under a high-emission scenario, models suggested that surface melting and net ice loss could eventually threaten the assumption that the waste would remain permanently contained. Under a stronger climate mitigation scenario, net accumulation could continue beyond 2100. Because of these uncertainties, Denmark established a long-term monitoring program with Greenlandic involvement. Scientists now measure snow, ice flow, meltwater, and the depth of the debris field. The city was abandoned in the belief that no one would ever need to think about it again. Instead, it became a question passed from the Cold War to future generations. Camp Century was never truly lost. Historical maps preserved its location. Scientists had detected signs of it with older radar systems. But the image recorded by NASA in April 2024 showed the buried structures with unusual clarity. The aircraft carried UAVSAR, a radar instrument able to look downward and sideways through the ice. The mission's purpose was to study the ice sheet itself. The researchers wanted to test technology that could help map the thickness and internal structure of ice in Greenland and Antarctica. Then Camp Century appeared. In the new data, individual structural elements could be compared with the old layout of the base. Parallel radar returns a line with the trenches that once contained barracks, laboratories, and machinery. The city had not been rediscovered in the sense of finding an unknown place. Instead, modern technology gave the world a new view of something the ice had hidden for decades. The image carried a strange message. The base had been crushed, buried, abandoned, and yet its geometry still survived beneath the surface. A human pattern remained inside Greenland. There is another legacy beneath Camp Century that has nothing to do with missiles. Scientists working at the base drilled one of the earliest deep ice cores through the Greenland Ice Sheet. The core preserved layers of ancient snow and atmosphere. Material collected beneath the ice was stored for decades and later re-examined by modern researchers. Those samples have helped scientists investigate Greenland's distant climate history, including evidence that the region beneath Camp Century was ice-free during an ancient warm period. So the secret military base produced two very different legacies. One was a hidden nuclear plan and a buried field of waste. The other was scientific evidence that changed how researchers understand the history and vulnerability of the Greenland Ice Sheet. Camp Century was built because military planners believed the ice could be controlled. Its remains now help scientists understand why the ice cannot be taken for granted. The base was supposed to demonstrate American power over the Arctic. Instead, it became a monument to the limits of engineering, secrecy, and political ambition. The soldiers left. The reactor left. Project Iceworm disappeared into classified archives. But the ice remained. It bent the tunnels, crushed the buildings, buried the waste, preserved the scientific record. And decades later, revealed the outline of the city to an aircraft passing overhead. Camp Century is still beneath Greenland. Not a functioning city. Not an intact base waiting to be entered. But a distorted military landscape sealed inside moving ice. It is a reminder that abandoned places do not always remain in the past. Sometimes they wait beneath the surface until technology, politics, or a changing climate makes them visible again. America built a secret city under the ice. The ice destroyed it, and now the future must decide what to do with everything the Cold War left behind.